Hello, Pack. The storm had been building since midday, and Wren was 2 hours from shelter when it finally came down on her. She walked into it the way she walked into most things now, because there was no one left to tell her not to. 3 weeks earlier, the Council of Ironhold had stripped her of her name in front of her own pack and told her she was not worth the ground she stood on. She had believed them about the ground. She had not yet decided about the rest. She was still walking when the first of the Thornvil wolves stepped out of the pines ahead of her. Let's begin. The storm came down from the northern pass like something with a grudge. Wren had been following the old trade road through the high pine country for 2 days, making for the neutral town of Caldervane, where she had a contact who owed her a favor and a room above a tannery that would ask no questions. She had done the math. She had enough food. She knew the road. What she had not accounted for was the way the sky turned the particular greenish-gray of serious weather at midday, or the speed with which the temperature dropped from cold to dangerous, or the moment she rounded a bend in the road and found 4 wolf pups huddled against a fallen tree, already half buried in the first wave of snow. She stopped walking. The pups were young, 8 weeks, maybe 10, too young to be alone, too young to have survived the night if the storm hit full force, which the sky was promising it would. They were pressed together in a pile, the largest one on the outside trying to cover the others, shaking hard enough that she could see it from 20 feet away. She looked at the road ahead. She looked at the sky. She looked at the pups. She set down her pack. The largest pup snapped at her when she reached for it, a reflex, not aggression, the kind of fear that bites because it doesn't know what else to do. The snap caught the back of her hand, shallow but sharp. She didn't pull back. She held still and let it smell her, kept her breathing even and her eyes down, waited until the shaking slowed from terror to something closer to exhaustion. "I know," she said quietly. "I know. It's all right." It wasn't all right. The snow was coming harder now, and the temperature was still dropping, and she was standing in the middle of a road that belonged to no one she knew, with 4 pups and a cut hand in a storm that did not care about any of it. She worked methodically. She unpacked the oilcloth from her medical kit and spread it against the fallen tree, creating a windbreak. She unpacked her second layer, the wool one she'd been saving, and lined the hollow with it. She moved each pup carefully, one at a time, speaking in the same low, even tone the whole time, not because she thought they understood the words, but because the sound seemed to help. The largest one stopped snapping after the second pup was settled. By the time she had all 4 tucked into the hollow, it had pressed its nose against her wrist and was allowing her presence with the exhausted resignation of something that had run out of other options. She understood that feeling. She pulled her pack over and wedged herself against the tree beside them, blocking the worst of the wind with her body. She had 1 fire kit. The wood was wet. It took her 11 attempts to get a flame that held, shielding it with her cupped hands against the gusts, feeding it the driest shreds of bark she could find in the hollow of the fallen tree. When it finally caught and steadied, she held her hands over it for a long moment and felt the shaking in her fingers begin to ease. The pups pressed in around her without being invited. The largest one put its head on her knee. She did not let herself think about what she'd lost. She had made that rule 3 weeks ago and she was keeping it. She thought about the fire instead, whether it would hold, whether the wood would last, whether she had enough body heat to matter against a storm this size. The storm answered by doubling. She pulled the pups closer and held the fire and did not move. She did not hear the horses. The first thing she knew of anyone else was the large wolf that appeared at the edge of the firelight, a full-grown male, silver-gray and enormous, standing absolutely still in the snow and looking at her with amber eyes that caught the flame. She went very still herself. She had no weapon worth mentioning against a wolf that size. She had a skinning knife and the iron poker from her fire kit, and the knowledge that neither would be enough if this animal decided she was a threat. She did not reach for either. She held the pups closer and met the wolf's eyes and waited. The wolf lowered its head, not in attack posture, something else, something she had no category for. Then the horses came through the trees and the men on them, and the wolf stepped aside to let them pass as if it had been holding the space for them. There were 6 riders. The one at the front pulled up short when he saw her, a controlled stop, no wasted motion, and looked at the scene in front of him with the kind of expression that had been trained out of all obvious reaction. He was wearing a dark riding coat with no insignia she recognized, but the way the other 5 riders positioned themselves around him told her everything she needed to know about which one was in charge. He was not what she expected a king to look like. She had met the King of Ironhold. He had been loud and broad and had filled every room he entered with the specific gravity of someone who needed you to know he was important. This man was none of those things. He was still, the way the wolf had been still, and he was looking at her with gray eyes that were taking in the fire and the pups and the cut on her hand and her position against the fallen tree with the particular attention of someone who was not going to miss anything. "Those are Thornveil pups," one of the riders said. A woman, voice clipped and careful. She was looking at Wren the way people look at problems. "I know," Wren said. "You're in Thornveil territory." "I know that too." She kept her voice level. "The road goes through it. I was making for Caldervane." "In this storm?" The storm was not part of the plan. The gray-eyed man had not spoken. He was still looking at her with that same careful attention, and she noticed that his horse had not shifted once since he stopped it, an animal as controlled as its rider. "The pups were alone when I found them," she said, directing this at the woman since she seemed to be the one asking questions. "I don't know how long. Long enough that the largest one was already hypothermic." She paused. "I wasn't going to leave them." A silence that had weight to it. The gray-eyed man dismounted. He did it without announcing it, without looking at his riders for permission or confirmation, just stepped down from the horse in one clean movement and walked toward her through the snow. He crouched down at the edge of the firelight, outside her space, not inside it, and looked at the pups. The largest one lifted its head from her knee and looked at him. Then it put its head back down. Something shifted in his expression. Not much, just a fraction. He looked at her hand. "That needs cleaning." "I know," she said. "I'll do it when the storm passes. It'll be infected by then." "Then it'll be infected." She held his gaze. "I'm not leaving them." Another silence. The snow was coming harder. The fire was holding, but only just. He looked at the fire, then at the pups, then at her, and she had the uncomfortable feeling of being read very carefully by someone who was very good at it. "Kaylin," the woman rider said from behind him, a warning in it. He didn't look back. "We're not leaving them either," he said. Flat and final. No explanation offered. None needed. They made camp 30 yards back in the trees where the canopy broke the worst of the wind. Kaylin's riders were efficient and silent. They had a shelter up in 20 minutes, a proper fire going in 5, and a pot of something hot producing steam before she had finished moving the pups into the new space. She did it carefully, one at a time, the largest one last, and it followed her on unsteady legs rather than being carried, which she took as a good sign. She cleaned her hand herself in the light of the larger fire with the kit from her pack. She was aware of Kaylin watching from across the camp. She was aware of it the way you're aware of a sound you can't quite place. Present, unignorable, not yet identified. "You're not from Thornveil," the woman rider said. She had introduced herself as Dara, and she had the manner of someone whose job was to assess risk and report back. No. Where from? Wren considered the question. Ironhold, she said, because lying about it would be discovered in approximately 3 minutes by anyone who paid attention to accents, and she had decided when she left that she was done lying about things. A pause. Dara looked at Kaylin. Kaylin was looking at the fire. Ironhold cast someone out 3 weeks ago, he said, a healer. The council announced it publicly. He paused. They said she'd been stealing. The fire popped. Wren did not look up from wrapping her hand. She hadn't been, he said. It was not a question. No, she said. I hadn't been. What had you been doing? She finished the wrap and tucked the end in. Treating wolves the council had decided weren't worth treating. Keeping records of what the council was doing to the pack's lower ranks. Things that were inconvenient for certain people. She looked up then. They needed a reason. I gave them one by existing. Kaylin was quiet for a moment. His gray eyes had gone to that particular stillness she was already learning to read as him thinking. The King of Ironhold is a careful man, he said. He is, she agreed. Careful enough to make sure it looked clean. And you didn't fight it. Fighting it would have required a pack at my back. She said it simply, without bitterness. I didn't have one. The fire settled. One of the pups made a small sound in its sleep. The largest one was pressed against her side, and she could feel its warmth through her coat. You have a name, Kaylin said. Wren. He nodded once, as if filing it away. I'm Kaylin of Thornveil. I know, she said. Something that might have been a very controlled version of surprise crossed his face. You recognized me. I recognized that you were in charge and that your people were afraid to say your name in front of me. She paused. The rest was inference. The almost smile that crossed his face then was the kind that happened before he could stop it. Brief, involuntary, gone in a moment. He looked back at the fire. Dara, across the camp, was watching all of this with the expression of someone recalibrating. The storm ran through the night and into the following morning. Wren slept in 2-hour increments, waking to check the pups and feed the fire and check the pups again. The largest one had stopped shaking by midnight. By dawn, all 4 were warm and breathing evenly and taking turns investigating the edges of their sleeping space with the cautious curiosity of animals who had decided the danger had passed. She was awake when Kaylin came to sit near the fire in the gray pre-dawn light. His riders were still sleeping. He moved quietly for a large man, and he sat down without asking if the space was available, which she noted was the first time he'd done something without a kind of implicit permission-seeking. She handed him the spare cup from her kit. He looked at it for a moment, then accepted it, and she poured from the small pot she'd been keeping warm. You counted, he said. She looked up. What? The fire attempts. Last night, when you were building the first fire. He wrapped both hands around the cup. You counted them. Under your breath. She had not known she was doing it. She filed that away without knowing why. 11, she said. I know. I was watching from the tree line. A pause. You didn't stop. It was cold. Most people would have stopped at 6 or 7 and started moving instead. Decided the fire was a lost cause. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire, not at her, and she had the sense that this was deliberate, that he offered things more easily when he didn't have to watch them land. What were you doing in the high pine country? She asked. Patrol. We've had rogue activity on the northern border for 2 months. He paused. We weren't expecting to find anyone on the road in that weather. I wasn't expecting to be on the road in that weather. No. He turned the cup in his hands. The pups were from the Aldenmere Den. It's 3 miles northeast. They must have wandered during the first snow before the storm hit. Their mother? A pause that told her before the words did. We found her last week. Rogue attack. She absorbed this. So they were already alone. Yes. She looked at the 4 small shapes sleeping in the wool-lined hollow she'd made. The largest one had its chin resting on the second largest, a position of ownership and protection that was entirely unconscious. They'll be all right, she said. It was not quite a question. They will now. He looked at her. Because of what you did last night. She didn't answer that. She poured herself a cup and drank it and watched the fire, and the silence between them was the kind that didn't need filling. By mid-morning the storm had broken, and the road to Caldervane was theoretically passable. Wren packed her kit with the efficiency of someone who had been packing and unpacking it for 3 weeks. She was aware that Kaylin's riders were watching her. She was aware that Kaylin was watching her. She was also aware that the largest pup had followed her to the edge of the camp and was sitting on her boot with the calm certainty of something that had made a decision. She looked down at it. No, she said. The pup did not move. I'm not staying, she told it. I don't have anywhere to stay. Dara appeared at her elbow. The king would like to speak with you before you go. Wren looked at Dara. Dara had the expression of someone delivering a message she had not been asked to editorialize on. All right, Wren said. Kaylin was standing at the edge of the trees, looking out at the road. He turned when she approached, and she had the same feeling as the night before, of being read carefully, of being seen with more precision than she was accustomed to. Caldervane, he said. Yes. You have a contact there. I do. A room above a tannery. She stopped. You know about the tannery. I know most things that happen in the neutral towns near my border. He said it without apology. It's a reasonable room. Reasonable contact. A pause. It's also 3 days' walk from any healer who could look at that hand properly, and the infection risk in this cold is not nothing. She looked at her wrapped hand. I'll manage. I know you will. He said it simply, without condescension. That's not the point. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the road. Thornvale doesn't have a healer. We had one. She left 8 months ago. He turned to look at her. We have a full pack and a border under rogue pressure, and no one who knows wolfsbane antidotes or can manage a difficult birth or can do what you did last night. She understood what he was offering. She also understood what it would cost her to accept it. I was cast out of Ironhold, she said. Publicly, with the council's announcement, anyone who takes me in takes on that political weight. I know. The King of Ironhold and the King of Thornveil are not allies. We are not. The ghost of something crossed his face. We are also not enemies. We are neighbors who have a careful understanding. A pause. He would object to me offering you shelter. He would not be able to do much about it. He would make it difficult for you. He already makes things difficult for me. That's the nature of having him as a neighbor. He looked at her steadily. I'm not asking you to stay forever. I'm asking you to come to Thornvale Hold, let someone look at your hand, rest for a few days, and decide from there. She was quiet for a long moment. The largest pup had followed her from the camp and was now sitting against her leg with the same settled certainty as before. The pups, she said, will come with us. They'll go to the pack nursery. He paused. The largest one appears to have made a separate decision about that. She looked down. The pup looked up. Its amber eyes were steady and warm and entirely certain. She looked back at Kaylin. He was watching her with those gray eyes that gave very little away and somehow gave everything, and she had the particular sensation of standing at a threshold without quite knowing which side she was already on. "A few days," she said. "A few days," he agreed, flat and final. Thornvale Hold sat at the end of a long approach through pine forest, stone walls rising above the tree line with the solidity of something that had been there for centuries and intended to be there for centuries more. The gate was iron and old and very large. The courtyard inside it was swept clean of snow, except for the edges, where it had drifted against the walls in the particular way of places that got real weather. The pack was waiting. Not formally. They hadn't had time for formal, but the people in the courtyard, the wolves in the shadows of the stables, the children near the great hall doors, all of them had gone still in the way that packs go still when something happens that they don't have words for yet. Wren came through the gate on foot. Kaelin had offered her a horse, and she'd declined. She preferred to arrive on her own feet, which was a preference she'd had since childhood and had never been able to fully explain. She was carrying her pack and the bone-handled kit and the largest pup, who had refused to be put down for the last mile and had communicated this preference with the quiet immovability of an animal who had decided. The first wolf to bow was an old gray female near the stable wall. She lowered her great head slowly, deliberately, in a movement that had nothing of submission in it and everything of recognition. Then the one beside her, then the 3 wolves near the gate. It moved through the courtyard like something passing through water. Not a wave exactly, more like a pressure change, a shift in the air that each animal responded to in sequence. The children near the great hall doors went quiet and still. A man carrying firewood set it down and stood up straight. Wren stopped walking. She had heard of this. She had treated wolves in 3 different packs, and she had read the old law manuscripts, and she knew, academically, what a pack recognition looked like. She had never been at the center of one. She had not known it would feel like this, like being seen by something much older and much larger than any individual animal. Like the territory itself was taking a breath and deciding. She stood very still and let it happen. Kaelin had stopped his horse 3 paces behind her. She could not see his face. She could feel the particular quality of his stillness, the kind that was not absence but attention. Dara beside him said nothing. The largest pup in her arms put its nose against her jaw and exhaled. They gave her a room in the east wing, which Dara told her was the guest quarters, and which Wren suspected was more than that, based on the quality of the fireplace and the view of the inner courtyard. The room was stone and iron and firelight, and it smelled like pine resin and old wood, and it was the first enclosed space she had been in for 3 weeks that did not belong to someone who wanted something from her. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment and did not let herself feel it. A woman named Petra came to look at her hand. Petra was the pack's closest thing to a healer. She knew basic wound care and had a good eye for infection, and she cleaned and rewrapped Wren's hand with the efficient care of someone who had been doing this work for a long time without quite the right tools. "You should have cleaned it sooner," Petra said. "I know. It's not infected yet. Might be by morning if you're unlucky. I've been unlucky before." Petra looked at her with the kind of directness that older women in packs sometimes had, the kind that had stopped caring about social niceties somewhere around the 3rd decade. "The pups are in the nursery," she said. "The big one cried until they put your coat in with it." Wren looked at her. "I gave them an old coat," Petra said. "Not yours. Similar smell." She paused. "You're good with animals." "I'm a healer." "Healers aren't always good with animals. Some of them are good with bodies. It's different." She tied off the bandage. "The king watched you come through the gate." "I know." "He didn't watch the courtyard bow. He watched you." Wren said nothing. Petra collected her things with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had delivered her message and was satisfied. Dinner is in the great hall at sundown. You don't have to come. Someone will bring you a tray if you'd rather." She paused at the door. "But the king eats in the hall." She left without waiting for a response. Wren went to dinner. The great hall was long and stone-walled and lit with iron chandeliers that held enough candles to make the whole space amber and warm. The tables were full. This was a real pack, 300 people at least, and they ate together in the way that packs do when the habit has been maintained for generations, with the comfortable noise of people who are used to each other. She was seated at the end of the high table, which she suspected was Dara's doing because it was close enough to be included and far enough from Kaelin to be deniable. She ate and kept her head down and watched the hall the way she watched every new space, cataloging exits, identifying the people with authority, noting the small dynamics that told you what was actually true about a place beneath what it presented. What was true about Thornvil was that it was a pack under strain. The border trouble was visible in the faces of the patrol riders who came in halfway through dinner, still in their riding coats, eating fast and talking in low voices. The pack was loyal and functional, but there was a particular kind of tiredness in it, the kind that comes from sustained pressure without resolution. What was also true was that Kaelin ran it with a quietness that was not passivity. She watched him move through the hall before he sat, stopping at 2 tables, crouching to speak to a child, exchanging 3 words with a man who had the look of a senior patrol leader, and all of it done without ceremony, without the performance of authority. He simply was in charge, and the hall knew it, and he did not need to remind anyone. He sat at the center of the high table and ate his dinner, and did not look at her. She noticed that he didn't look at her the way you notice a sound that stops. After the meal, when the hall was clearing, he came to the end of the table and stood there for a moment without speaking. "How's the hand?" he said. "Petra thinks it'll be fine." Petra is usually right. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world. "You watch the whole hall during dinner." "I always watch new spaces." "What did you see?" She considered him. He was asking genuinely, not testing her, not performing interest. He wanted to know. "A pack that's tired," she said, "but loyal. The patrol riders, they came in late and they're still here, which means they're not going home after duty. They're staying in the hall. That's either habit or preference. And the way they position themselves near the exits tells me it's preference. They feel safer here." She paused. "The border trouble is worse than you've said publicly." His gray eyes were very still. "The child you stopped to speak to, the one with the red hair, near the second table. He's one of the patrol leaders. He was watching the door every time it opened." She looked at her cup. "He's waiting for someone who hasn't come back yet." A silence. "His father?" Kaelin said. 3 days overdue from the Northern Patrol." "I'm sorry." "So am I." He was quiet for a moment. "We found tracks this morning. He's alive, moving slow." He paused. "We'll have him back by tomorrow." She nodded, filed it away. "You do that," he said. "Do what?" "File things. I can see you doing it. Something lands and you hold it for a moment, and then you put it somewhere." She looked at him. He was watching her with the same careful attention as the night before, and she had the sudden uncomfortable sensation of being read by someone who was as good at it as she was. "It's a useful habit," she said. "It is." He turned his cup in his hands. "My counsel is going to want to speak with you tomorrow." She had been expecting this. "About my status. About your presence here. About what I intend." A pause. "They're careful men. They'll be polite." He looked at her directly. "They'll also be looking for reasons why taking you in is a political liability." "It is a political liability." "Yes." He said it without apology. I want you to know that before you go in there, so you're not surprised." She studied him. "Why are you telling me this?" He was quiet for a moment, looking at the table. "Because you came through my gate with 4 pups and a cut hand, and no pack and no protection, and you didn't ask for any of it. You just did the work." He looked up. "You deserve to know what room you're walking into." The fire in the hall had burned down to coals. Most of the tables were empty now. The candles in the chandeliers had guttered to half their height. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, stood, looked at her for a moment with those gray eyes that she was learning to read the way you learn to read weather. Not perfectly, not yet, but with increasing accuracy. "The council chamber is in the north tower," he said. "Dara will take you at the 9th hour." He paused. "Get some sleep." He left without waiting for her response, which she was beginning to understand was not rudeness, but the particular efficiency of a man who said what he meant and trusted it to land. She sat alone in the emptying hall for a while and watched the coals and did not let herself think about what it meant to be in a place where someone had warned her. The Council of Thornveil was 3 men and 1 woman, all of them older than Kaelin, all of them with the particular smoothness of people who had been navigating political situations for a very long time. Their names were Aldrich, Finnick, Sorel, and Maren. Maren was the woman. She had careful eyes and carefully enunciated words, and she was, Wren assessed, in the first 2 minutes, the most dangerous person in the room. Kaelin sat at the head of the council table. He did not introduce Wren. He let her introduce herself, which she understood was deliberate. He was not presenting her as his. Not yet. Not in this room where everything meant something. "You were cast out of Ironhold," Aldrich said. He was a large man who had the manner of someone who had decided to be reasonable and wanted credit for it. The council there made a public announcement. "They did," Wren said. "The charge was theft." "The charge was theft. The charge was false." She said it plainly, without heat. "I treated wolves the Ironhold Council had decided were expendable. I kept records of treatment outcomes that reflected poorly on certain council decisions. I was inconvenient. The theft charge was the instrument of convenience." "You have no evidence of that," Finnick said. "I have the records. They're in my pack." She paused. "They're also why the charge had to be theft and not incompetence or misconduct, because the records show neither." A silence. Maren was watching her with those careful eyes. "You understand that sheltering you creates a complication with Ironhold." "I do." "The king there will view it as a provocation." "He will view it as a minor one," Wren said. "He doesn't want the records to surface. Publicly sheltering me would draw attention to them. Quietly making my life difficult is more his style." She paused. "He'll send someone to ask for my return. He won't push harder than that unless pushed." Maren's eyes sharpened slightly. "You know him well." "I treated his pack for 6 years. I know how he thinks." She held Maren's gaze. "I'm not an asset he particularly wants back. I'm a loose end he'd prefer tied off quietly." Aldrich leaned forward. "Then perhaps the simplest solution—" "No," Kaelin said. 1 word, flat and final. The council table went quiet. Aldrich looked at him. "Kaelin, she saved 4 Thornveil pups in a storm with a cut hand and no shelter and no obligation to do so." His voice was even, unhurried. "She did it alone, in the dark." He paused. "The simplest solution is not on the table. The political cost. I know the political cost." He looked at Aldrich with the particular stillness that she was learning meant he had already decided and was waiting for the room to catch up. "I'm asking the council to formally note the circumstances of her arrival and the service she rendered. I'm asking for a temporary residency status while we assess the situation with Ironhold." He paused. I'm not asking for permission. Another silence. Marin was looking at Kaelin with an expression that Wren could not quite read. Not opposition exactly, something more like assessment. Temporary residency, Marin said slowly, while we assess. Yes. And if Ironhold sends a formal request for her return, then we'll have a council meeting. He looked at Marin, and I'll tell them no. Marin was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Wren. You have the records with you. Yes. I'd like to see them. Wren looked at Kaelin. He gave the smallest nod. Not permission, she understood, but confirmation that she could trust the offer. All right, she said. The days after the council meeting had a particular quality to them. The quality of a held breath, of something being decided in the spaces between ordinary things. Wren worked. It was what she knew how to do, and Thornvil needed it badly. She spent the first day in the pack nursery with the pups, assessing them properly now that she had light and warmth and her full kit. They were underweight but otherwise healthy, and she put together a feeding schedule and a temperature protocol, and wrote it out in her clearest hand and gave it to the nursery keeper, a woman named Berta, who received it with the relieved gratitude of someone who had been managing without adequate information for too long. The largest pup watched her from its sleeping space with amber eyes that followed her every movement. You can't come with me everywhere, she told it. The pup's tail moved once, slowly, certain. She started seeing pack members on the second day. Small things at first, a sprained wrist, a persistent cough, a child with an ear infection that had been treated incorrectly and needed to be started again. Word moved through the pack the way it always did, and by the third day there was a quiet line outside the room they'd given her to work in, and she moved through it with the focused efficiency that had always been her best quality, the one she'd never had to learn because it had simply been there from the beginning. Kaelin appeared in the doorway on the afternoon of the third day. He stood there for a moment without speaking, watching her work. She was setting a dislocated shoulder, a patrol rider who had taken a fall, and she was talking the man through it in the low, even voice she used for procedures, and she did not look up when Kaelin arrived because the shoulder required her full attention. The shoulder went back with a sound that made the rider swear and Wren say done in the same breath. She looked up. Kaelin was watching her with that expression she was learning to read, the one that was not quite neutral. The one that had something underneath it that he had decided not to name yet. How's the border? She asked. Complicated. He came into the room and sat on the edge of the work table, not in her space, but near it. The patrol leader came back this morning. The red-haired boy's father? Yes. A pause. He told his son before he told me. I walked past the hall and they were just... He stopped, looked at his hands. He was just holding him. She was quiet for a moment. The border situation, she said. There's a rogue pack working the northern tree line. Not random, organized. Someone is directing them. He looked up. The Ironhold border is 20 miles north of the rogue activity. She absorbed this. You think Ironhold is involved? I think it's possible. He was careful with the words, the way he was careful with everything. I don't have proof. I have a pattern. He paused. Your records might be part of it. If the Ironhold Council has been systematically underreporting pack casualties. They have, she said. That's in the records. He looked at her. Then someone is hiding losses. Which means someone is hiding why the losses are happening. She understood the shape of it. You need the records. Marin needs the records. She's already started working through them. He paused. She asked me to tell you she thinks you were right about the charge being an instrument of convenience. She has a contact in Ironhold who confirmed the timeline. Wren was still for a moment. It was the kind of confirmation that should feel like vindication and mostly felt like exhaustion. Good, she said. quietly. He was watching her. "You're not going to say anything else about it." "What would I say?" "Most people would say something about being right." "Being right didn't protect me," she said. "It just means the records are accurate." She looked at her hands. "That matters for the pack. It doesn't change what happened to me." A silence. "No," he said. "It doesn't." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry for what happened to you." She looked up. He was looking at her directly, and there was something in his face that was not the careful, controlled expression she'd been reading for 3 days. Something that had been set down from a height and was resting on the table between them, offered without ceremony. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, looked away, looked back. "The council wants to extend the temporary residency, formally, with pack protection status." She was quiet. "That means Ironhold can't touch you," he said. "Not legally, not under pack law." He paused. "It also means you're under Thornveil's authority. Mine." He said the last word carefully, as if he was aware of the weight of it. "I wanted to ask you directly before it went to the council, not tell you." She looked at him for a long moment. He held the look steadily, and she had the sense that he was doing the same thing she was, reading the room, reading the person, filing things away, and waiting to be sure. "Ask me then," she said. "Will you stay?" She was quiet for long enough that the fire shifted and the candle on the work table guttered. "As the pack's healer," she said. "As the pack's healer," he agreed. "To start." The last 2 words landed carefully. She noted them, filed them away. "Yes," she said. The Ironhold messenger arrived on the 7th day. He was young and nervous and very well dressed, and he carried a sealed letter with the Ironhold Council's mark on it, and he delivered it to Kaelin in the great hall with the careful formality of someone who had been told exactly what to say and was saying it exactly. Wren was not in the hall when it arrived. She heard about it from Petra, who had heard about it from the stable hand who had taken the messenger's horse. And she went still in the middle of rewrapping a sprained ankle and finished the wrap and thanked the woman and went to find Dara. Dara was in the corridor outside the council chamber. She looked at Wren with the expression she'd had since the morning after the storm, the one that was still recalibrating but had largely finished. "He's asking for a meeting," Dara said. "Kaelin, he wants you there." "What does the letter say?" "It says Ironhold requests the return of a former pack member for further questioning in an ongoing matter." Dara paused. "It's polite, very polite." "It would be." "Kaelin's response is going to be polite too." Dara looked at her. "He's going to say no." "I know." "The council is behind him. Marin made sure of that this morning." Dara paused. "She went through your records last night. All of them." She paused again. She was very quiet at breakfast. Wren looked at the council chamber door. "He wants you there," Dara said again. "Not to speak. Just to be in the room." She understood. A presence was a statement. She would be standing in the room as the thing Kaelin had decided to protect, and the messenger would see it, and the message would go back to Ironhold clearly. "All right," she said. The meeting was brief. Kaelin sat at the head of the council table and read the letter and set it down and looked at the messenger with the particular stillness that meant he had already decided. "Thornveil thanks Ironhold for its communication," he said. "The individual in question arrived in Thornveil territory under circumstances of some service to this pack. She is currently under formal pack protection status." He paused. "She will not be returning to Ironhold for further questioning or any other purpose. If Ironhold has specific legal questions regarding the original matter, they may submit them in writing to the Thornveil Council for review." He paused again. "That will be all." The messenger looked at Wren. She met his eyes without expression. He looked back at Kaelin. The Council of Ironhold will submit their concerns in writing, Kaelin said. Yes. Flat and final. No explanation offered, none needed. The messenger left. The council chamber was quiet for a moment. Marin looked at Kaelin. That will provoke a response. It will, he agreed. You're prepared for that. I am. He looked at Ren. Something in his face was very still and very certain at the same time. We are. That evening she found him in the courtyard after the hall had emptied, standing near the gate with his back to the keep, looking at the tree line. The night was clear and very cold, and the snow in the courtyard was blue-white in the moonlight. She came to stand beside him. Not close, just near. The records Marin reviewed, she said. What does she think? She thinks there's enough for a formal complaint to the Interpack Council. He paused. She thinks it'll take time. Ironhold will fight it. They will. But the pattern is there. He turned to look at her. You documented it for 6 years. That's not nothing. I didn't know what I was documenting at the time, she said. I was just keeping accurate records. It seemed important. It was important. He was quiet for a moment. It is important. She looked at the tree line. The pines were silver and still in the cold. Why did you really bring me in? She said. He was quiet long enough that she turned to look at him. He was looking at the gate, and his jaw was set in the particular way she'd learned meant he was deciding how much to say. The pups, he said. That was real. We needed a healer. That was real, too. A pause. And I watched you sit in a storm for 8 hours with a cut hand and 4 pups that weren't yours, and a fire you had to light 11 times, and you didn't stop, and you didn't ask for anything, and you didn't... He stopped. Started again. You didn't perform it. You just did it. She was quiet. I've been running this pack for 9 years, he said. I know what it looks like when someone does something because they need to be seen doing it. And I know what it looks like when someone just does the thing because the thing needs doing. He paused. You just did the thing. It was cold, she said. That almost smile again. Brief, involuntary, gone. Yes, he said. It was. She looked at him. He was looking at the tree line again, and she had the sense that he was standing at the same threshold she'd been standing at since she came through the gate. Close to something, not quite naming it. You had a mate, she said. Not a question. His jaw tightened. Not much, just a fraction. 3 years ago, he said. She left, went north. A pause. I don't know if it was me or the pack or the border trouble or all 3. She didn't say. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't ask. That's probably the truest thing I can tell you about it. You didn't ask, she said. I thought if I asked, she'd have to answer, and if she answered, I'd have to hear it, and He stopped. The silence stretched. I let her go without asking, and then she was gone, and I had asked nothing, and I've been... He paused. Careful, since then. She understood careful. She had been practicing it herself for 3 weeks. She left because she wanted to, Ren said. Not because you didn't ask. He looked at her. You can carry the not asking as a wound if you want to, she said. But it's not the wound you think it is. She held his gaze. She made a choice. You let her make it. That's not the same as failing her. He was very still. You've been punishing yourself for 3 years for something that was not entirely yours to carry, she said. She paused. That's a waste of a good man. The silence between them was the kind that had weight and warmth at the same time. Ren, he said, yes. I knew when you came through the gate. He said it quietly, looking at the tree line. I knew before the courtyard responded. I knew when you were still on the road. He paused. I don't know what to do with that. She was quiet for a long moment. I don't either, she said. Yet. He turned to look at her. She held his gaze and didn't look away. Yet, he said. Yet, she agreed. The words sat between them in the cold air, small and precise and full of everything that hadn't been named yet and would be, eventually, when they were both ready. The formal declaration happened on the 14th day. Kaelin called the full pack to the courtyard at mid-morning, which was not standard procedure for anything, and which meant the hall emptied in about 4 minutes, and the courtyard filled with 300 people and approximately 40 wolves who came in from the surrounding territory in the unhurried way of animals who had been waiting for something to be made official. Wren stood at the edge of the courtyard and watched him come down the keep steps and thought about the road and the storm and the 11 attempts at the fire and the way the largest pup had put its head on her knee in the dark. Kaelin stood in the center of the courtyard and looked at his pack. 14 days ago, he said, a woman came through our gate with a cut hand and a pack on her back and 4 Thornveil pups she'd pulled out of a storm alone. His voice carried without effort, the way voices do when they're not performing projection, but simply speaking from a place of certainty. She had no obligation to those pups. She had no pack at her back, no status, no protection. She did it because the pups needed doing for. He paused. That is the kind of person I want in Thornvale. The courtyard was very quiet. The Council of Ironhold cast her out with a false charge and a public announcement. They did it because she kept accurate records of what they were doing to their pack, and accurate records were inconvenient. He paused. Those records are now in the hands of Thornvale's council and will be submitted to the Interpack Council for formal review. Marin, standing near the council members at the side of the courtyard, nodded once. Her name is Wren, Kaelin said. She is Thornvale's healer. She is under this pack's protection, permanently. He paused. The word landed flat and final and without qualification. Anyone who had thoughts about her status or her worth based on what Ironhold said, I'm asking you to revise those thoughts. Not because I'm telling you to, because you watched her come through that gate and you know what you saw. The first wolf to bow was the old gray female from the stable wall. She lowered her head slowly, the same deliberate movement as the first day, and this time it was not a recognition event but a confirmation. Something the pack had already decided being made visible. It moved through the courtyard again. All the way through, this time. Every wolf. Most of the people. Wren stood at the edge of it and felt the particular sensation of belonging somewhere that had not been available to her for a very long time. She looked at Kaelin. He was looking at her from across the courtyard with those gray eyes, and the expression on his face was not the controlled, careful one she'd been reading for 2 weeks. It was the one underneath it. The one that had been there since the road, since the fire, since the 11 attempts and the pup on her knee, and the word yet spoken into cold air. She held his gaze. She did not look away. The largest pup, which had somehow escaped the nursery and was sitting on her boot with the calm certainty of an animal that had made all its decisions, thumped its tail once against the stone. That evening he came to the east wing. She heard his footsteps in the corridor and recognized them. She had been learning the sounds of this place for 2 weeks, the way you learn a new language, by listening for the patterns. And she set down the manuscript she'd been reviewing and waited. He knocked. She noted this. He had not knocked before. He had appeared in doorways, stood at thresholds, waited to be acknowledged. This was different. "Come in," she said. He came in and stood near the door for a moment, and she could see him deciding how to begin, which was unusual because he was generally a man who had already decided before he arrived. You didn't say anything, he said. In the courtyard. You didn't need me to. I wanted you to. He paused. I wanted to know what you thought. She looked at him. I thought it was the most honest thing I've heard from someone in authority in 6 years. She paused. I thought you meant it. I did. I know. She held his gaze. That's what made it honest. He came further into the room and sat in the chair across from her work table, and the firelight caught the planes of his face and the gray of his eyes, and she had the particular sensation of the threshold being crossed. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, but with the quiet inevitability of something that had been true for 2 weeks and was now being acknowledged. I want to say something, he said. And I want to say it clearly, because I've spent 3 years not saying things clearly, and I'm done with that. She waited. I knew on the road, he said. I knew when you were still in the storm, and I was still in the tree line, and you hadn't seen me yet. I knew before the pack responded, before the courtyard, before any of it. He paused. You are my mate. I believe that. I've believed it since the road. He looked at her steadily. I'm not asking you to believe it yet. I'm not asking you to do anything with it. I'm just, he paused, saying it. Because it's true, and I'm done carrying true things without saying them. The fire shifted. The candle on her work table held steady. She looked at him for a long moment, at the careful hands and the gray eyes and the jaw that was set with the effort of having said the thing, and the stillness that was not armor anymore, but something closer to the stillness of something that had finally stopped bracing. I know, she said. He looked at her. I've known for a while, she said. I was waiting to see if you'd say it. She paused. I was also waiting to see if I was ready to hear it. And I've been ready for longer than I admitted. She held his gaze. I just needed to be somewhere safe enough to admit it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table, slowly, without drama, and set his hand flat on the work table between them, open, palm up. She looked at it for a moment. She placed her hand over his. He closed his fingers around hers carefully, the way you hold something you've been waiting to hold for a long time and are not going to rush now that you have it. They sat like that for a while, in the firelight, in the quiet. The storm was long past. The pups were in the nursery. The records were with the council. The border trouble was not resolved, but it was being addressed with accurate information by people who were paying attention. She had arrived with nothing and a cut hand and a fire she'd lit 11 times. She had not been looking for anything. She filed that away, the particular irony of it, and held it for a moment, and then she set it down somewhere warm and did not pick it up again. Pack, I'm going to ask you something before we go. Wren came through that gate with a false charge on her name and 4 pups in a storm and not a single person at her back. She didn't ask to be seen. She didn't perform the sacrifice. She just did the work in the dark and let it be what it was. And Kaylin, a king who had spent 3 years being careful, who had let someone leave without asking, who had carried the silence of that like a wound, he'd decided he deserved. He watched her light that fire 11 times, and he knew. He knew before the pack knew. He knew before she was ready to know. And he waited. And he said it clearly when it was time. And he put his hand on the table and let her choose. Here's what I want to know. Was it the storm that did it? The pups? Or was it the 11 attempts at the fire? The fact that she didn't stop? Tell me in the comments what you think she saved first. The pups or him? And if this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needed a wren tonight. Someone who's been doing the work in the dark without anyone watching. That's where we leave them. See you next time, Pack.